I think the idea of like, there's a lot of pressure on students, to kind of have a track, usually towards like finance consulting, but, we always try to talk to those students that feel a bit different. And, again, there's a lot of pressure from either society, your parents, your friends, to have it all figured out by the time you graduate. And I really like that idea, that aspect of like, you can kind of start to go your own direction. It's not like a prescribed path.
Yeah, that was always true and continues actually to be true there. Um, so when I was in school, yeah, both with my undergraduate and then later with my master's, no one was doing what I was doing, and everyone thought I was sort of wasting my time and maybe a little bit crazy, um, because I believed there was something happening in the career space, even if I couldn't articulate a job title and a degree. Um, and it honestly took me being very scrappy. That's what I just always tell students. I was probably more stubborn than is always helpful, but I knew what I was excited about. And so I was sort of blending the thing I was excited about with the environment with what is most practical and getting most business type education and experience that I could, in the hopes that it would kind of fit together at some point. Um, but it actually meant, like, when I wanted the environmental studies degree minor, no one had it in so long. Like, no student had asked for it. It was in the course book, but I went to the advisor listed, and he hadn't had anyone knock on his door, he said, in about a decade. So yeah, so we had to like actually make sure the classes still existed, and at times I had to go like argue certain classes should fit into it. And so it taught me a lot about self advocacy and a willingness to not be told no, if you really believed in it. And so I think those are some of the things that um, are good practice skills to learn when you're sort of in school and you have sort of a protective cover of, you've got an advisor who, even if he thinks you're crazy, is in your corner, and you can look at the full course curriculum. And I mean, I would just sit down and go through everything that looked like it might apply and go to him and say, can we make this one fit, and do the paperwork for it. And so you kind of learn how to piece together a path within bureaucracy in kind of a safer space. And so that's what I mean when I say I learned some things about being the anomaly that served me later on, and to not be embarrassed when I did get told no and had to start from scratch.
Yeah. And can you talk about, because I really like that idea of the word you used. I saw it in another interview you did, was stubborn, right?
Mm.
And I think it's really fascinating because, especially like in entrepreneurship or anything like that, they always talk about like the valley of despair. And it really is that, who can survive that long period where you're kind of on your own. And that usually is the big kind of unlock. But how do you balance that with, say, 95% of the time it's best to be stubborn, and then the 5% of the time you have to be flexible. So how did you learn to balance that as you grew?
I mean, I don't know that I balance it all that well every day, but I do think the sort of the litmus test I try to use is, what are your core principles and values? And for me, I was very clear I wanted a job that I was excited about every day. And that might change. What is exciting at 25 might not be the same at 35. But if you know that you are, on the whole, interested in getting up every day, and that you're going to sleep at night feeling like you did the right thing and you made some momentum in the world, which were sort of things for me that were important, um, that kind of kept me clear headed about what internships I wanted along the way, what companies I wanted to work for, what classes I wanted to take. And so it didn't mean that I was right or wrong in every single decision I made, but it did help provide that clarity of purpose. And I think that is sort of an underlying principle. We all have a calculation for ourselves, and no one's is right or wrong. It's very, very personal. But if you figure out those core principles, I think that will help you figure out when to relax on some decisions, maybe try something new, try something that you don't think quite fits. But if it still falls in those principles of, am I going to be excited tomorrow to try this? On the bad days, do I still feel good about the work that I'm doing? Because there will be lots of them. I think those are the ways I sort of kept my North Star around what was important.
And one thing I thought was also an interesting bit about your career is well, that you espoused obviously in your kind of corporate social responsibility report was kind of continuing education. But for yourself, right? Like I noticed too that you were part of the Aspen Institute. And again, that idea of entrepreneurship and kind of those kind of focus areas. And so almost continuing to develop yourself in that way and thinking through that. So I was curious about how you view kind of the idea of continuous education, how that fellowship program helped you kind of continue to grow as well.
You have to be in a state of constantly learning these new businesses and really enjoy it. So I think part of it is just the day to day job function. But I did, to your question, go and join the Aspen Institute to do a fellowship about 2 years ago on this idea of entrepreneurship. That they talk about how do you become a change maker of sort of using that startup mentality, but within a corporate setting. And sometimes it's nice to do things like that, where you sort of spend some time outside the day to day job to be reminded of like folks who think like you do, who are facing some of the same challenges, who can help you figure out how to like look around the corner and solve for them, and have a network of sort of like contemporaries who also want to see the same change you want to see.